Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 28th of December. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. If you remember, yesterday we discussed about the possible surprises that both parties are able to give or to present to each other. I'm not sure about the Ukrainians if they're able to do anything, but if we're talking about the Russians, this morning they started with a lot of surprises. If we take a look at this map, at the Russian sources map, you're going to see a very interesting picture. You see that there are a lot of icons of fire, and there are icons of fire over Liman, over Slaviansk, over Kramatorsk, over Drushkovka, or over Konstantinovka, over these towns. Furthermore, there is fire icon over Kharkiv. So today, during the day, the Russians, I believe that first time since summer or something like this, attacked the Ukrainian military object, but not the Ukrainian energy facilities, because starting September the Russians were attacking just the energy facilities and some kind of civilian infrastructure, just to destroy and to reduce the Ukrainian possibilities of their economy and so on. And today, during these heavy clashes that we see all over the front line today, during the battle for Bakhmut, the Russians decided to change their focus and their attack the back towns, the Ukrainian fortifications, all these towns. The Ukrainians uses all this town to supply, to support, to keep manpower, to keep reserves and so on. So these are very important towns, and the most important thing that the Ukrainians during the previous week deployed a lot of forces on this front line. These front line are overpopulated, over-concentrated by the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians need to keep forces in the back in these towns. So this is the reason, and that's why these towns are the best and the very good targets for the Russians, because they know that they just need to find the disposition of the Ukrainian forces, and I believe that by one attack they are able to destroy maybe hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers that are located in these towns. So the Russians attacked these towns right during the battle for Bakhmut, and I believe that the Ukrainians got a lot of losses, but I think that we are going to receive these updates tomorrow or maybe the day after tomorrow, as soon as the Russians are able to complete their calculation and something like this. Now let's start from the north. Let's start from Kupiansk, Liman front line. The Ukrainians, if we're talking about Kupiansk front line, the situation is completely stable in this area. No movements from both sides. The Russians are not attacking, the Ukrainians are not attacking. The Russian sources are saying that the Ukrainians try to accumulate some reserves, some forces in this area, and to continue offensive operation in the direction of Kuzyumovka, Novoselovska. During the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainian lost around 30 soldiers, something around 5 armored vehicles. So as you can see, the number of losses says for itself about the situation on this front line. So these losses are very low, and I'm sure that maybe if we're talking about killed soldiers, maybe there are no killed at all, just wounded or something like this. The only progress I would like to admit is that the Russians destroyed as a result of effective artillery duels, the Ukrainians lost their howitzers Stab B in direction of Petropavlovka. So as you can see, this is one of achievements that the Russians managed to develop or achieve by the end of this year. They started effective counter artillery duels, and as a result of these duels in the north of Kupiansk area, the Ukraine lost one howitzer. If we're talking about Liman, we receive a lot of updates from this area, a lot of updates from both sides. Furthermore, as you can see, the Russians used Caliber or the rockets of that type in Liman to attack the Ukrainian forces in this area. As a result, we will see these results tomorrow. But anyway, the Ukrainians are saying that they got very close to Kremenna. As you can see, the Russian sources map has been updated. Now the Russians shows this small bag between green line and the gray line, saying that this is the Ukrainian progress in this area. So we can say that Ukrainians managed physically establish control over the road that connects Kremenna and Chervonopopovka. I believe, and I do really believe, that situation in this area is critical. The Russians They don't provide any information about this area. The thing that they're saying that they're pretty effective, that they're attacking the Ukrainians on the line of Makiivska, Nevska on the north. So the Ukrainians attacks in direction Chornopopovka, and the Russians try to push the Ukrainians from the north. And as a result of clashes in Liman area during the previous 24 hours, lost around 170 soldiers and something around 6 armored vehicles. So as you can see the same picture, the number of losses says for itself. If we compare to these two regions like Liman and Kupiansk, on the Kupiansk front line, the Ukrainian lost just 30 soldiers, and on Liman 170. So we understand that the intensity of clashes in this area are very high. The Russians attacks in direction of Nevska, the Russians attacks in direction of Terny, the attacks in direction of Novolubovka and Serebryanka. All these towns were under very heavy fire. This is Serebryanka. And if we turn back to the Western sources map, the Ukrainians, we can say, and it's completely true, that the Ukrainians ready to start offensive and storm operation of Kremenna from 3 sides. From the north, from Chervonopopovka in direction of Zhitlovka, in the middle one from Zarechna to Dibrova, Kuzmina, and in the south through this forest in direction of Kremenna, through this forest from Serebryanka, Gorlovka. So the Ukrainians are ready. Furthermore, a few days ago they reported about the fact that they managed to establish control over Kremenna, but that was some kind of fake news, fake update. And later the Russians provided their own information, their own calculations, and they said that from the moment when Ukrainians reported about successful attack in direction of Kremenna, the Ukrainians lost around 1,000 soldiers in this area. Anyway, the Ukrainians are ready. The question is whether they're planning to do this or not, because the Ukrainians understand that there are a lot of problems in the south in direction of Soledar, and it's useless waste of manpower, of energy and time to attack Kremenna if you know that that the front line on the south is going to be collapsed. Now we're moving to Soledar, and today we have a lot of updates from this area, and the most important one is that the Russians during the day managed to develop some progress in direction of this railroad station Dikonska, this one. First of all, before we'll discuss this front line, let's update the situation according to the latest update about the current situation we have from the front line. The Russians controls this area from the north, from Charlie Group area, from this bridgehead, and the Russians controls this part they took. If you remember, a few days ago, they got established control over this school. So this is the front line. This is the picture that we have today in Soledar. And so these days the Russians try to develop their offensive operation to the north from this front line from the school, and they try moving through the brushes. They try to develop their offensive operation as far as possible to the west and attack the Ukrainians from the north in this area. So as you can see, this is attack from 2 sides, and I believe that Soledar is going to fall very soon. Furthermore, very interesting picture we can see right in front of Razdolovka. The Ukrainians still hold these positions, but the Russians test this area by attacking by small attempts of storming, and the Russians are saying that soon Vysel is going to fall. This town is reduced to ruins. There are no buildings in this area that are left. The town is completely destroyed, and from the Ukrainian side there are no places, there are no buildings which Ukrainians are able to use as places where they can hide from a Russian artillery attack. And if the Russians are able to take Vysel, we see and we understand that this distance is completely unprotected, and there are no places, no even a square meter, where the Ukrainians are able to have some positions. Of course, the Russians don't have the same thing, but anyway, if this area collapses, Vymka, Ivanodarivka, lots of towns will be collapsed automatically. So let's return to Razdolovka. The Russians increase the pressure in direction of Razdolovka, and of course, if the Russians are able to take control over Razdolovka and to establish some bridgehead in this area, stable bridgehead in this area that they are not planning to return or something like this, of course, in this case, attack in direction of Kremina is just a waste of time and manpower and resources, because from this very moment the Ukrainian forces in Seversk will appear in operational encirclement, because there are not much roads left from this town. This is the first road that Ukrainians are able to use for evacuation process, and this is the second one. So as you can see, all these roads are not very big. Furthermore, I believe that the Russians won't stop in this case. They will try to develop their bridgehead in this area, and of course the entire force from Seversk can be encircled. Of course, the Ukrainians will be able to step back, let's say, from Seversk Donetsk in direction of Yampol, Liman, and then Liman by making this big hook. But something tells me that situation in Kremina is not a real situation, and the Russians try to force the Ukrainians to get in this trap, because as soon as the Ukrainians start offensive operation or storm operation in Kremina, they will be forced to use some group of their forces, a lot of forces in this operation. This is not 100 soldiers operation. You need to use for storming of Kremina around maybe 2,000 or 3,000 soldiers, and that's a lot. Maybe even more, maybe up to two brigades. I believe the number in 3 brigades is enough to take control over Kremina, but this is 3 brigades, and that's a lot. And if everything goes wrong on the south, these 3 brigades may be encircled from the Russian side. So let's follow the situation. And now we're moving to Donetsk. Today, as you can see, the Western sources map has been updated. If you remember, they added this small back on, let's say, north and northwest side of this cross. If you remember, even at the beginning of this week, the Russians controlled just this gas station and this cross, and during the day the Russians increased the pressure in direction of Podgorodny, and during the day and today as well, they established control over some number of checkpoints around this town, and as you can see now, the Russians start storming of this area. Furthermore, the Russians, I believe that they established final control over this road T1302, and now they're able to develop some movements to the north as well, because they achieved some operational square. I believe that this area is completely mined, but anyway, in months, in days, in weeks, the Russians will be able to demine this area and to attack Krasnogorovka, to start offensive operation in Krasnogorovka, to increase the pressure over Soledar. So the picture is very beautiful for the Russians as well on this front line. Let's return back to this town. As you can see, there is an icon saying that the Russians got control over. If we're talking about Bakhmut itself, if you remember, the Ukrainians were attacking in direction of Zaitsova, and we discussed this operation. Today we received the numbers of that operation, and as far as I understand, I remember the Ukrainian lost a lot of soldiers in this operation, but now I don't see this update. Anyway, if we're talking about the east part of Bakhmut, there are no changes, very heavy clashes along the front line, and the Russians are not like in a hurry. Keep their positions, try to save their soldiers and to attack the Ukrainians as much as possible. If we're talking about Kupiansk front line, today we receive a lot of updates from this area. And first of all is that the Ukrainians moved their 17th Tank Brigade in this area. If you remember, this brigade used to be in Kherson district. Now the Ukrainians completely see the entire picture of the front line. They know exactly where they need to reinforce the position, so that's why they sent some battalions of 17th Tank Brigade, and furthermore they moved around 250 soldiers from special forces in direction of Bakhmut, just to reinforce this area as well and to stop the collapse process in this town. If we're talking about the Russians, as you can see, there is an icon on the southwest part of Klishchiivka. The Russians managed to take another checkpoints in direction of Klishchiivka. Furthermore, the Russians are saying that Ukrainians left the suburbs or outskirts of this town and they moved in direction of these trenches. They have mined everything. So the only territory that remains under Ukrainian control is the central part in the trenches on the northwest from the central part of town. The edge area of this town is in the gray zone, or maybe are in the under Russian control. Furthermore, if we are talking about, as you can see, during the day the Russians attack all these towns, like the most important logistic towns for this front line. So I believe that the Russians managed to deal a lot of damage, and I believe tomorrow we're going to see more updates. And of course, this is not a very good situation for the Ukrainians. Now we're moving to Donetsk, and as you can see, the central part, civilian residential area of Donetsk, is not under fire. Mainly the Ukrainians attacks the frontline positions where the Russians have trenches, logistic centers, their bases, and so on. But they stopped attacking the central part, and mainly we see this picture as a result of very nice, very effective artillery duels from the Russian side. Today we got another updates about artillery duels. If we're talking about this front line, the Ukrainians lost around 80 soldiers and something around 10 armored vehicles. I'm talking about armored vehicles and infantry. But if we're talking about artillery, the Ukrainians continue lose their artillery systems. If we're talking about Krasnogorovka, the Ukrainians lost 2 M777 artillery systems. If we're talking about Mariinka and Grigorievka, the Ukrainians lost 2 howitzers, D20 and D30. Furthermore, in Krasnogorovka, the Ukrainian lost the German howitzer FH-70. If we're talking, by the way, about Seversk, the Ukrainian lost 3 Grad systems, also artillery systems. So as you can see, during this critical, most important period of time, the Ukrainians loses not just infantry and initiative, they're also losing artillery system. They have a lack of shells, and furthermore, they're losing artillery systems. So for now, as I see, according to my understanding of the situation, I see that everything plays and goes in Russian favor. Of course, I'm not saying that the Russians are able to use this situation, to use this favor, to use these benefits to win. We know that everything may turn every single second, but at least for now, I see that it's not like 50-50 if we're talking about situation. I see that it's like something like 40-60 in Russian favor, if we're talking just comparing, understanding the situation. So the Russians wins slowly, not very fast, without superiority, but everything they are able to show, they show this with a little bit better quality than the Ukrainians. They have a little bit better quality in artillery, they have a little bit better quality in stormtroopers, in supply and support, and all these small benefits plays significant role in the entire progress in battle for Bakhmut. If we're talking about South Donetsk area, the Ukrainians are saying that the Russians attacked 72nd Mechanized Brigade in direction of Ugledar. As a result of that attack, the Ukrainians lost around 70 soldiers, sometimes 7 armored vehicles. Furthermore, the Ukrainians sent some commandos in direction of between Solotka, Victoria, Volodymyrovka, but that commandos was spotted by the Russians, and the Russians attack, and as a result of that attack, the Ukraine lost these commandos. I'm not sure about the losses. I believe that something around 15 soldiers or were forced to step back, or they left or their bodies were left on the battlefield. The Russians continue artillery duels also in Kherson area as a result of some act of artillery duel in Kherson district. The Ukrainian lost another howitzer Stab-B. So this is about the situation on the ground. We don't have any updates from the Russian border, from the border of Belarus, from this area. Just clashes, just like I don't know, the most interesting, the most intensive period of time on the Donetsk front line. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon. Have a good day. Bye bye.